David, a curious little boy, skipped happily along the cobblestone path of Riverside Park. His ice cream cone dripped in his hand as he looked around, excited by the world around him. His mother, Sarah, sat on a bench nearby talking on the phone. She was tired from work but kept an eye on David, trusting him to be safe. At 8 years old, David had a spirit full of wonder and questions, always searching for something new. He didn't know it yet, but today would be the day that would change everything for both him and his mother. While David continued to skip through the park, something caught his eye. He saw a man walking through the crowd, and the way people moved aside for him made David stop in his tracks. The man had tall security guards around him, and he wore a fancy suit that seemed out of place in the casual park setting. David had never seen someone like him before, but there was something about the man that felt oddly familiar. David watched closely as the man passed by, his heart racing. He wasn't drawn to the man's wealth or importance though, there was something deeper. The man's face, it was so familiar. David had seen that face before, not on the news or TV, but in the old photo albums at home. His mind raced back to the times he had looked through those albums with his mother, searching for family memories. He remembered seeing the man in those old pictures, smiling and laughing. In the photos, the man's arm was casually draped around Sarah's shoulders, and both of them looked so young and happy. They seemed to be friends or maybe more. David's heart beat faster. Could this man be the same person from the photos? Why was he in their family album? The questions swirled in his young mind as he took a few hesitant steps toward the man, his curiosity growing stronger with each moment. David's heart raced as he slipped away from his mother's sight. His small footsteps quickly carried him through the crowd, each one bringing him closer to the man he had seen in the photo albums. Alexander Hayes, the Billionaire CEO, was standing near the park's central fountain, talking on his phone. David's curiosity pushed him forward, his mind filled with the image of the man in the photos with his mother. When he reached Alexander, David didn't hesitate. Despite being so small, he tugged gently at the man's designer jacket. Alexander looked down, surprised to see a young boy standing in front of him. For a moment, the CEO seemed annoyed, his expression sharp as he looked at David. But then something changed. The boy's eyes were wide with innocence, and his face was filled with genuine curiosity. "Why do you appear in my family's photo albums?" David asked, his voice steady, even though his heart was pounding in his chest. The question hit Alexander like a sudden shock. He stared at David for a moment, unable to respond. His phone slipped from his hand, clattering to the ground. The people around him stiffened, their hands going to their earpieces, but Alexander waved them back. He was too captivated by the boy standing before him. "Excuse me?" Alexander asked, kneeling down so he could look David in the eye. His voice softened, clearly intrigued. "What did you say?" David's eyes never left Alexander's and he repeated, "You're in the pictures with my mom. She gets sad when I ask about them." Alexander's face softened. The boy's simple question had stirred something deep inside him, something he hadn't expected. As David stood in front of Alexander, still waiting for a response, Sarah finally noticed what was happening. She had been sitting on the bench, still talking on the phone, when she saw David talking to the man in the suit. At first she didn't think much of it, but then she saw the familiar face. Her heart skipped a beat. It was him, the man from the photo albums. Her breath caught in her throat, and she felt a cold chill run down her spine. Without thinking, Sarah rushed over to David, her footsteps quick and heavy with urgency. Her heart raced as she approached the scene, trying to calm herself, but a sense of panic began to rise in her chest. She couldn't let David get too close. She couldn't let him get involved with this man from their past. As she reached them, she stopped for a moment, her eyes locked on Alexander's face. She could feel the years of unspoken history between them in the tense silence. Alexander stood there, his expression a mix of surprise and something deeper, something that seemed to make the air between them thick with old emotions. Sarah quickly reached out and took David's hand, pulling him away from Alexander. She didn't want David to be caught in the middle of this. David, confused by his mother's sudden tension, looked up at her. "Mom, why won't you talk to him? He's in our pictures." His voice was filled with innocence, unaware of the complicated history that Sarah shared with the man in front of them. Sarah's heart tightened and she squeezed David's hand a little tighter. "Come on, sweetie, we need to go," she said softly, her voice trembling as she tried to keep her emotions in check. But David didn't let go of his curiosity. "But Mom, he's in the pictures. Why won't you talk to him?" Sarah's face grew pale as she glanced at Alexander. The pain in her eyes was clear, but she quickly turned away, trying to hide it. She didn't want David to see how much this moment was hurting her. The past she had tried to forget was now standing right in front of her, and it felt like everything was falling apart. Later that evening, after they had returned home, Sarah sat down on the couch, her hands resting in her lap as David climbed up beside her. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the city outside. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to gather her thoughts. She had been avoiding this conversation for years, but now, with David's innocent questions and the man from the past still fresh in her mind, there was no avoiding it anymore. "David," Sarah started, her voice soft but steady, "there's something I need to tell you about that man you met today." David looked up at her, his wide eyes filled with curiosity. "Who is he, Mom?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of the past pressing on her chest. "His name is Alexander Hayes," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I knew him a long time ago. We were close. In fact, he was my boyfriend." David's eyes grew even wider. He didn't fully understand, but the words seemed important. "So, he was like, your friend?" Sarah smiled softly, though it was a sad smile. "Yes, David, he was more than just a friend. He was someone I cared for a lot. We had big plans together. But sometimes life doesn't go the way we expect." David furrowed his brow. "What happened? Why don't you talk to him anymore?" Sarah's gaze grew distant as she looked out the window, her mind going back to the past. "His family didn't like me. They didn't think I was the right person for him. They were rich, powerful, and I wasn't." She sighed, her voice full of regret. "They made it clear that if I stayed in his life, it would ruin his future. They said he'd never make it if he stayed with someone like me." David listened carefully, trying to make sense of what his mother was saying. "So he left you?" Sarah nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Yes, David. He left and I never saw him again. I thought I was doing the right thing even though it hurt. But things were different back then. I couldn't be the reason his life fell apart." David stayed quiet for a moment, absorbing her words. He still didn't fully understand everything, but he could see that this man, Alexander, was someone important to his mother. A part of her life that had been hidden for so long. One evening after dinner, David sat quietly at the table, his mind racing with all the new things he had learned about his mom's past. He had spent days thinking about what she had told him. He knew there was more to the story, and his curiosity grew even stronger. After a while, he decided to ask his mom about something that had been bothering him. "Mom," David began, his voice soft but determined, "why did you really leave Alexander? You said he was your boyfriend, but something doesn't make sense." Sarah froze for a moment, her hand on the dishes she was drying. She knew this day would come, but she had hoped it wouldn't be so soon. She took a deep breath and turned to face him. Her heart weighed heavy and the memories came rushing back. "David," she said quietly, "there's something else I need to tell you. When I found out I was pregnant with you, I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. Alexander was ready to start his career. He was just beginning to make a name for himself, and his family, well, they weren't happy about us being together." David looked at her, trying to understand. "What did they do?" Sarah sighed deeply, her eyes filling with emotion. "His family didn't want me to be part of his life. They told him that if he stayed with me he would never succeed. They made threats. They said they would use their power and money to make sure his business failed, and that it would ruin his future." She paused for a moment, wiping away a tear. "So I left. I didn't want to cause him any more pain. I sent him back his engagement ring and I disappeared. I thought it was for the best. I wanted to protect you, David. I didn't want you to grow up in a world where you were caught in the middle of all that public scrutiny and danger." David didn't say anything for a long time. He could see that his mother's choice had been hard, but he still couldn't understand why she hadn't told him sooner. After their brief encounter in the park, Alexander couldn't shake the question David had asked him. "Why do you appear in my family's photo albums?" The question echoed in his mind, haunting him. He had to know the truth. He couldn't stop thinking about the boy's innocent face and the connection he felt to Sarah. Unable to move forward without answers, Alexander decided to take matters into his own hands. He hired a private investigator to look into Sarah's life. It wasn't a decision he made lightly, but his need to understand what had happened between them, and why Sarah had kept so many secrets, was overwhelming. The investigator's report came back a few days later. It was full of facts and details about Sarah's life since she had disappeared from Alexander's world. The most striking thing Alexander learned was how hard Sarah had worked to raise David on her own. She had put herself through nursing school, studying late into the night while working long shifts at the hospital. She had worked tirelessly to provide for David, even though they lived in a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood. There were no signs of luxury or comfort, just the quiet strength of a single mother doing everything she could to give her son a good life. As Alexander read through the report, he felt a growing sense of guilt and admiration. He had no idea how much Sarah had sacrificed. He had assumed that she had moved on easily, but the truth was much harder to accept. She had struggled. She had worked and fought alone. The emotional weight of these discoveries began to affect Alexander deeply. He had built his empire, but it felt empty now. He thought of his own wealth and success, and it felt meaningless in comparison to the sacrifices Sarah had made. This wasn't just about business or status. It was about the family they had once planned. And now he had to face the fact that he had missed so much. He couldn't ignore it anymore. It was time to confront Sarah. After reading the investigator's report, Alexander felt torn. He had learned so much about Sarah's life and sacrifices, and it made him question everything he had thought he knew. His brother James noticed the shift in Alexander's mood and gently urged him to be cautious. "Alex," James said, leaning against the doorframe of his brother's office, "I know this is important, but you have to be careful. David is just a child. He doesn't fully understand what's going on. And Sarah? Well, her past with you isn't something to take lightly." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, frustration and sadness in his eyes. "I need to know the truth, James. I have to know if David is really my son. I can't ignore this." James nodded, understanding the weight his brother was carrying. "I get it. But think about it. There's so much history here. Sarah might not be ready to talk, especially after everything that happened. You have to give her space." Despite his brother's advice, Alexander couldn't shake the need to reach out to Sarah. The truth, no matter how painful, had to come out. He knew that if he didn't take this step, he would regret it for the rest of his life. That evening, Alexander decided to contact Sarah. He composed a message, trying to keep it respectful and gentle, knowing how much emotion was tied up in the past. "Sarah, I know this is difficult, but I think it's time we talk. I've been thinking about everything and I need to know the truth. David deserves to know who he is, and I want to be a part of his life. Please, let's meet and finally address everything." He sent the message, his fingers trembling as he pressed send. After all these years of silence, he was finally reaching out. He didn't know what Sarah would say, but he couldn't sit by anymore. His heart told him this was the right thing to do, no matter how complicated the past might be. Now he had to wait, hoping that Sarah would be willing to face the truth together. David's mind raced with the questions that had been swirling around since he met Alexander in the park. Why did he appear in their family photo albums? Why did his mom react the way she did? Why was he so important to her? He needed answers. His mother wouldn't talk about it, but David was determined to find out the truth. One evening, after his mom had gone to bed, David decided he couldn't wait any longer. He remembered the business card Alexander had given his mom in the park. He had found it hidden in her purse, and now it felt like his only clue. With the card in his pocket and his heart pounding, he knew what he had to do. David had learned the city subway system after many trips with his mom. She had shown him how to navigate it just in case of an emergency. And to David, this was an emergency. He was going to find Alexander and ask him the one question that had been haunting him: "Are you my dad?" The subway ride was long and the train clattered along the tracks, but David stayed focused on his goal. He was scared, but more than anything he was determined. He thought about how much his mother had tried to protect him from the past, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something important was being hidden from him. He had to know the truth no matter what. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, David reached Hayes Technologies. The building loomed in front of him, tall and shiny, much different from the modest apartment he and his mother lived in. He stood outside for a moment, looking up at the glass tower. His heart raced faster, but his feet moved him forward. He walked into the lobby, feeling small in the grand space, but he didn't let that stop him. He approached the reception desk, standing on his tiptoes to see over the counter. "Excuse me," David said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "I need to see Mr. Alexander Hayes. It's very important." The receptionist looked down at him, surprised by the little boy standing alone. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but he knows me," David replied. He took out the business card and placed it on the desk. "I'm David Evans. I met him in the park. Please, I need to talk to him." The receptionist hesitated for a moment, then picked up the phone. David's heart beat faster as he waited, his hands clutching the card tightly. After waiting in the lobby, David's heart skipped a beat when the elevator doors opened, and Alexander Hayes stepped out. He looked down at the small boy standing near the reception desk, his face filled with a mix of shock and surprise. David felt nervous but didn't let that stop him. He had come here to ask the one question that had been bothering him for so long. "Mr. Hayes," David said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Are you my dad?" The question hung in the air and Alexander froze. His eyes widened as he looked down at the boy, his heart pounding. He had never expected to hear these words from David, but now that he had, he felt as though the ground beneath him had shifted. The weight of the moment was heavy, and he knelt down to David's level, trying to process everything. David's green eyes stared back at him, full of innocence and curiosity, and Alexander felt a surge of emotions he hadn't known existed. He had never known about David's existence until recently, but now, standing face to face with the boy, everything was starting to make sense. The photos, the questions, the painful history, it all came rushing back. Before Alexander could speak, Sarah burst into the room, breathless and terrified. She had been contacted by Alexander's assistant, and her worst fear had come true. David had found his way to Alexander, and now they were all facing the consequences of the past. The air was thick with tension as Sarah's eyes met Alexander's. Both of them stood frozen, caught in a moment that felt like a lifetime. There were no easy answers, no quick fixes. All the years of silence and avoidance had led to this moment, and now they had to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. David, unaware of the emotional storm around him, stood quietly, waiting for the answers he so desperately needed. After the emotional confrontation in Alexander's office, Sarah and Alexander found themselves in a small meeting room. David had been taken to a nearby office, and now, with the door closed between them and their past, it was just the two of them. The air felt heavy with all the unspoken words, and neither of them knew where to begin. Alexander sat down first, running a hand through his hair. "I never knew, Sarah. I never knew about David. I would have been there if I had known." His voice was quiet, filled with regret. Sarah sighed and took a seat across from him. "I didn't want to hurt you, Alex. I thought I was protecting you. Your family, they made it clear that I wasn't part of your world. They told me I would ruin your future. And when I found out I was pregnant, I thought it would be better if I left." She paused, wiping away a tear. "I was scared. I didn't want you to have to choose between me and everything you were building." Alexander's expression softened. "But you should have trusted me, Sarah. I would have chosen you. I would have chosen our family over anything. I would have fought for us." Sarah looked down, her voice trembling. "I thought I was protecting you both. But maybe I was just running away from the truth. And now, David has to live with all the lies we told." There was a long silence, both of them lost in their thoughts. Finally, Sarah spoke again. "We can't change the past, Alex. But for David, maybe we can start over." Alexander nodded, a sense of resolution in his eyes. "For David, we'll take it slow, one step at a time. We owe him that." From that moment on, they began rebuilding their relationship, not for themselves but for David. Each small step brought them closer, and David, with his innocent questions and unspoken wisdom, became the bridge between them, slowly mending the broken pieces of their past. Over the next few months, Alexander and Sarah worked hard to build a new routine for their family. They started with small steps, agreeing to meet regularly to talk about David's needs and how to co-parent together. Every week, they had dinners, sometimes at Alexander's penthouse, sometimes at Sarah's modest apartment. It wasn't easy, but they were both committed to making it work for David's sake. At first, things were a bit awkward. Sarah and Alexander had been apart for so long, and there was a lot to adjust to. But as they spent more time together, they began to remember the bond they once shared. They talked about everything: David, their past, their hopes for the future. Alexander became a more regular part of David's life. He picked him up from school sometimes, took him to the park, and even helped him with his schoolwork. Slowly, David began to see Alexander not just as a stranger from the photos, but as someone who cared for him. The family was healing, but they took things slowly. Sarah was careful not to rush David into accepting Alexander as his father. She wanted to make sure he was comfortable with the changes. It wasn't perfect, but every day brought them closer to the family they could have been, a family that, despite the past, was now starting to move forward together. On David's 9th birthday, the park was filled with laughter and excitement. Sarah had planned a small party for him, inviting a few of his friends from school. She worked hard to make the day special for David, knowing how much this birthday meant. This year, however, was different. Alexander was there too. He had been a part of David's life for a few months now, and Sarah had invited him to the celebration. Their relationship had grown stronger over time, and they were now able to sit together without the tension of the past. David beamed with happiness as he saw his parents talking and laughing together. For the first time in years they were not strangers to each other. It felt like a new beginning and David could sense the change. He watched his parents who had once been apart, now working together for him, and it filled him with joy. As the party continued, David ran around with his friends, but every now and then he would glance over at his parents. They were sitting side by side on a bench, talking and smiling like they had always been a family. It was the perfect day and for the first time David felt truly whole. The family wasn't perfect yet, but they were finally moving in the right direction together. It was a new beginning and for David that was all that mattered. As the birthday party ended, Alexander and Sarah found themselves standing together, watching David play with his friends. The evening air was calm and for the first time in a long while, everything felt right. Alexander turned to Sarah, his voice soft but sincere. "Sarah," he began, "I don't want to rush into anything but I want us to try again. For David, for us. We don't need to get married right away but I want to build something real. A family where we're both involved, where David has both of us in his life." Sarah looked at him, her heart full of emotion. She had seen how much Alexander cared for David and how much he had changed. It wasn't about rushing into anything or pretending everything was perfect, but about building something that would last. Something strong and steady, built on trust and understanding. "I agree," she said, her voice steady. "We'll take it slow but we'll do it together. For David." They stood there for a moment watching their son who was laughing and running, full of joy. The future wasn't certain but it was hopeful. The past had hurt but now they had a chance to build something better. And for David they would do whatever it took to create a family that was whole. As the days passed, David felt a sense of peace he hadn't known before. He was no longer torn between two worlds. His parents, once strangers to each other, were now working together to build a future for him. He could feel the change, the care in the way they spoke to each other, and the way they included him in everything. David looked forward to the weekends when both his parents would be together. They didn't rush anything but it felt like they were getting closer every day. The awkwardness from before slowly faded, replaced by laughter and shared moments. For the first time, David knew that he was safe, loved, and that both his parents would always be there for him. He understood that it wasn't always easy, but with time and effort, even the most complicated situations could be fixed. The past had been difficult, but it didn't have to define their future. David smiled to himself, watching his parents from a distance as they chatted and laughed together. He knew they had a long way to go but he felt hopeful. His family was healing, and he could see a bright future ahead with both his parents by his side.